switch over to formal introductions, I do ask that you all check your phones, make sure they're silenced, any other devices, Tamagotchis, lightsabers, whatever it is you got stashed away, just put it on silent. Masks are optional. If you'd feel more comfortable with one, they are at the front of the store. After the reading and discussion, there will be a Q&A. We ask that you line up over here at this white pillar where we have a microphone. That's because we are filming an audio recording, so we want to make sure we can get your question. After Q&A, we'll have a signing line here at the desk. Once again, you'll line up at that pillar. Myself and one of my colleagues will be through to help manage the line and make sure everything goes smoothly. After the signing, our author is wonderful enough to be hosting an event downstairs in the den. Swing by, say hello again down there. So on to introductions. Tonight, I'm so excited to welcome Jeffrey Dale Lofton, celebrating the release of his book, Red Clay Suzie. Inspired by true events, the novel is a coming-of-age tale about Philbet, a gay, physically misshapen boy in rural Georgia who battles bullying, ignorance, and disdain as he makes his way in life as an outsider before finding acceptance in unlikely places. Originally from Warm Springs, Georgia, Lofton has called DC home for over 3 decades. For our DC area residents, you may recognize him as a member of our city's bustling theater scene or from his TV screen appearances. His years telling the stories of playwrights and scriptwriters taught him the power of a story arc, the splendor of language well used. Today, he is a senior advisor at the Library of Congress. Of note, I must mention that a portion of the proceeds from the sale of Red Clay Suzie will go to support the important work of organizations dedicated to helping at-risk youth. Lofton will be in discussion with Ralph Eubanks, the author of A Place Like Mississippi, which was published in 2021, and 2 additional books. From 1995 to 2013, he was director of publishing for the Library of Congress and is the former editor of the Virginia Quarterly Review at the University of Virginia. Currently, he is the faculty fellow at the Center for the Study of Southern Culture at the University of Mississippi. So, without further ado, please join me in welcoming to Politics and Prose, Jeffrey and Ralph.
Okay. I'm going to start with a little reading from Red Clay Suzie. So I'm going to set it up a little bit to give you some context. So Philbet, the protagonist of Red Clay Suzie, is born with a physical deformity of the chest. And this makes the idea of taking his shirt off in public unthinkable, is the best way to put it. In this passage, Filbert'S longing for Knox, the older boy that he idolizes to distraction. Philbet overcomes his fear of rejection, of anyone seeing his misshapen body carefully hidden from the world. Oh, and a point. Knox's nickname for Philbet is Keebler. "Let's go swimming," Knox said. And I avoided swimming because it's a shirts-off activity. So I said, I don't swim. "Oh, I'll teach you," he offered. "That's okay. Everyone needs to know how to swim." "I know how, I just don't do it." "Well, why not?" he asked. "Water gets in my ears," I replied. "Well, earplugs, they don't really work," I countered. "Oh, come on, Keebler, it's so hot." "Okay, you don't have to go in, but you're coming along. Let's go." And with that, he pulled me by the hand to the door, and then he guided me towards the woods, his hand on the small of my back. And I followed him down a steep but not deep gully into a mostly dried up creek bed. And then we turned, and we were in the open, the sun suddenly making us squint after having been in the cool shade of the piney woods, and a beautiful dark green lake spread out before us, surrounded by woods. He sat down on the bank and he started to pull off his shoes. "Let's go in." "No," I said way too abruptly. You don't have to put your head under water. No. Well, okay, he said. Before I lost my courage, I admitted, I don't want to take my shirt off, thinking that the only thing worse than telling him about my deformity was to leave him thinking that I was a total weirdo. Oh. I never done that. It's because of Keebler. It's okay. There's no problem. But then before I could talk myself out of it, I took off my shirt, my chest fully exposed in the sunlight, and I just stood. See? He didn't talk. He just stared. My teenage obsession, my teenage fantasy was just looking at what I spent hour after hour trying to hide. Say something, I thought. Does it hurt? Only when you don't touch it, I said without thinking. What? No, nothing. Just forget it. I never felt more exposed than I felt right then. My shirt off with my white, pasty, skinny, malformed bird chest in full view of the boy I loved. I didn't even know if he liked boys, much less freaky me. And the sun hurt so much because I couldn't hide. And the cavity in my chest, already smaller space than my heart needed to function, felt more compressed and restricted as usual. But I cherished this moment as much as I hated it. I mean, it hurt so much. Both the blood-pumping heart in my chest and the feeling heart, the one I wanted to give to him. Was I going to die right here in front of him? If I didn't take this chance now, I never would. If he didn't reject me for after seeing my half-sunken chest, then I could trust him. I could believe anything that happened after that. And he stared at me. But I couldn't look back. As embarrassing as it was, the pain was not because I was disfigured and all my organs were fighting for room. I ached because someone finally saw me.
Well, that was wonderful. And before I ask you a question, I have a comment. I love your Georgia accent.
Thank you. It comes with the package.
Well, I was just speaking with a friend in Knox. He said, I see that you've kind of left your Mississippi accent back here, which I do when I'm here. It kind of comes back when I'm there. So thinking about what you just read and thinking about the title of the book itself, under the title it says a novel inspired by true events. Is this book a thinly disguised memoir, the memoirist in me asks, of growing up gay in the Deep South?
Yeah, I would say, to use a literary term, yes, it's a fictionalized memoir. The protagonist, Philbet, like me, was born gay with a skeletal deformity of the chest in Warm Springs, Georgia, and much like Filbert'S family, my own, didn't quite know what to make of me, how to guide and shape my path in this world. I mean, it wasn't willful neglect. It was more parenting through equal parts love and ignorance and fear. And it was just difficult during the best of times because I always felt like I was on the fringes, looking in to this world, trying to sort it out and make sense of it, because what I saw didn't really match what I felt deep down inside of me. So here's an example of inspired by true events. Like Filbert'S daddy, my own, and I don't want to give away too much, but I will share this. Filbert'S daddy, like my own, was shot in the head while trying to break up a domestic dispute at the filling station, the convenience store that was across the road from where we lived. And while I've changed the details of that horrific event for the book, the core event is true. And that is why I think of Clay Suzie as based in fact, but not bound by fact.
Right. Well, I mean, it's, I always say that I'm a nonfiction writer because I'm bad at making shit up. But I think I think it's great that you're kind of using this stuff and you're creating you're using it as a tool of the imagination, which I think is really wonderful. Now, the other thing that drew me into Filbert is his obsession with cars. See, I love cars.
I love cars.
So is that something you share with Filbert as well?
Yes, I have always loved cars. Loved is probably not even a strong enough word. And it all started with these little Matchbox cars, which I believe I have one magically in my pocket. This is, and not surprisingly, they're the size of a matchbox. This is a 1968 Mercury Cougar, and this is my favorite of all time. And the doors, they open magically. And I used to think of these doors.
Does it have the hideaway headlights too?
This one does not have the hideaway headlights. We weren't fancy enough for that. But this car and I flew to places that only existed in my heart and my head, my imagination. And, I loved it so much. And to this day, I can give you the year, the make, the model of a car simply by catching the briefest glimpse of the curve of a fender or part of a taillight. And my partner, who has absolutely no interest in moving vehicles whatsoever, says that I'm a car savant. And I think if we look at this clinically, that's probably accurate.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what drew me in, because I'm also a car savant, because I would go to see the new cars. They used to keep them on wraps.
Oh yes,
and then
the reveal.
They would have
in the fall.
In the fall, yes. So I
like
always,
the TV shows.
So yeah, I always remember that. So you said I read somewhere that you read Clay Suzie in a surprising way, which is always a little bit tempting. Someone says they wrote something in a surprising way. Will you tell us a little bit about that surprising way that you wrote this book?
I'll be happy to. So I started writing Clay Suzie, as it turns out, after I left home to attend LaGrange College, which is a small liberal arts institution in LaGrange, Georgia. And because I was a teenager, the greatest appeal of LaGrange, Georgia, was that it was not where I was from. And and you might, why did I say, as it turns out? Well, I didn't know I was writing a novel. I didn't know it was a novel. I didn't know it was a collection of short stories or essays. I was just, it was an exercise. It was exorcism by exposition, I think. I had so much inside of me that I needed to get out. There was confusion and anger and humiliation and all of these things pent up inside of me that needed to come out. And so, I was gay, physically misshapen, effeminate, slight of build. So I was a target of bullying and derision from a very early age, 4 or 5, a young'un, as we were called back then at that age. And living at home had the effect of sort of pushing all that down and not allowing me to really deal with this complex fabric of my boyhood. But when I went to college, it all sort of came out. There was like a dam broke, and there was a flood of vivid, white-hot memories of my family, of boyhood and teenage friends, and all of whom played this really formative role in the mosaic of my life to that point. But it was a salve to write this, writing it, scribbling in my notebooks. It was a salve. It was like a steroid cream on an open wound. But then, of course, school got in the way, and I was so preoccupied, obsessed with hiding my body under layers of clothes and sweaters. And in hot as Blades as Georgia, that is not easy, let me tell you. So I put them away. I put those notebooks away with every intention of going back to them once I got my college sea legs under me. But I put them away for over 30 years. And this is what happened. Fast forward to Washington, D.C. And I read Call Me By Your Name, and I reread To Kill a Mockingbird. And this is the power of literature for me. It broke me open. There's no better way to describe it. And I went back and I unearthed those journals, and I reread them many times and to gain inspiration. And then I started writing. And to answer your question, finally, I started writing on my mobile phone on the metro going to and from my work at the Library of Congress. I would type away. And I didn't tell anybody until I had a full draft beginning to end. And then so one morning over breakfast, I said to my partner, I wrote a novel. And he almost spat out his coffee. And that's a moment I'll always treasure.
That's a great story. But I'm so glad you kept the notebooks. It reminds me of something that Joan Didion said, that, on keeping a notebook, that's a way to remain on nodding terms with your former self. Mm. And that's something that you did. And that's where you see what happens with keeping a notebook. Mm. Now, one of the things that we do at the Center for the Study of Southern Cultures, we've been collecting stories of the queer South. And there is kind of a thread that goes through a lot of those stories, and that is the bullying is one. And I know the author's note, you talk about bullying and body shaming. How do you see this book sending a message to young adults who feel marginalized, like Philbet?
I think one of the hallmarks of being a happy, well-adjusted adult is being comfortable in one's own skin. And I've come to accept my faults, my physical imperfections. And that has been a way to, in doing that, I've become more comfortable. And in being more comfortable, I've become more confident. And that's a really interesting question. I think that there were no books like Read Clay Suzie when I was growing up. At least they weren't on the bookmobile that pulled up magically every week in the driveway of the filling station convenience store that was across the road from our house. But there were no books like that on the bookmobile, and I didn't. Full disclosure, I didn't think of this as being I didn't think of it as being a message for people who were struggling, who felt like they were living on the fringes, my fellow fringies, as I think of them. It was really when I was typing away on my iPhone on the train, I'd get off at my stop, walk purposefully composed to my car, get behind the wheel, and just burst out in sobs before I started the short drive home. It was really then, and about halfway through, finishing the first draft, that I started thinking of it as a roadmap for people who were struggling, who were outsiders like me. And I think someone else said it better than I can say it. I think the most meaningful reaction to the book came from Pete Cross. And if you don't know that name, he is a lovely person and a very talented one. He's the voice actor who narrated the audio version of Clay Suzie. And when he finished recording, he and I chatted, and he said, "It's so tender and beautiful, and I wish I had had this book when I was growing up. It would have made all the difference." And I think that that's the highest praise that anyone could receive for their work.
No, I could not agree more. As a fellow bookmobile denizen, so
It saved us
the
all.
other one of those other things that we have in common. Now, Filbert'S best friend James. So I love James. He's a wonderfully drawn character, and I think he's really one of the unforgettable characters in this book. Can you tell us a bit about James and his friendship, for giving people a sense of who he is and what role he plays in this narrative?
Oh, James. I love James too. He is plain-spoken, insightful, wise, and he's Filbert's one true friend all the way from first grade all the way through high school. And he's Black, and he lives in a world where racism, conscious and unconscious racism, is just a fact. And so he and Filbert are viewed as outsiders in this world, and they have that in common. They are kindred spirits in that. But James sees the world in such a different way than Filbert. And in one scene, James opens the door that helps Filbert see the world in a more inclusive way. And, well, I don't want to say much more than that because I don't want to spoil it for anyone. But I will say this. I did not have a friend like James when I was growing up. There was a boy I thought would be open to being my friend. He was Black. And I did not approach him to ask him to be my friend. I was too timid. I was too shy. I was afraid of rejection. And I never did that. And so writing their story, their relationship into this book, it was my attempt to right a wrong and create a friendship on paper that might have been if I had just had the courage to act.
But you did that so well, because it really, what I liked about James and the way that you drew that friendship was, I remember friendships like that coming up in the early days of integration, particularly among younger children. I came into integration as a 9th grader. My sister came in as a 1st grader.
Different experience.
It's a very different experience. So that's where James really resonated with me. It was like I saw some of my sister's friends in James.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. So I know there are lots of wonderful scenes in this book. I mean, I can't. They're all great, but was there one that's I will say particularly difficult to write? And I guess the other question I have to ask is the one that was particularly difficult to write. Was it drawn from memory?
Oh. Well, the book is largely drawn from my experiences growing up as an outsider. We've established that. There was one, more than a scene, more of a section, and that was Grandaddy getting sick and dying. And that was very difficult because it was drawn from my own experiences. Watching, my grandfather was the first person I watched die, and I was alone with him. And so that was very difficult. And another section or scene, a couple of scenes that were difficult. Filbert'S golf playing school chum, his name is Wright, And that was difficult because it so reflected my own experience growing up as a gay teenager in a world that saw homosexuality as an affliction, to be treated with therapy or abstinence or prayed away or ignored, hoping it would go away. So I would say that there were more scenes that were difficult than were not.
What gave you the courage to go into those difficult scenes? I mean, what was it while you were typing on your iPhone going across DC? What really gave you, was it just the doing it and not knowing where it was going? Where did that courage come from?
I've come to accept myself, my faults, my, as a well-functioning adult does, I hope. And so, through that process, I have become, I believe that brings confidence and courage. But I actually don't think that it was courageous to write Red Clay Suzie. I think writing Red Clay Suzie gave me courage, because I didn't write it to be a novel. I started writing it thinking it was an exorcism by exposition. It was healing catharsis. And it was only about halfway through when I thought of it as being maybe a roadmap to help people who might be struggling as I struggled when I was a younger person. In fact, I think of it as sort of a coming out. When I took baby steps to sharing it with the world. When I came out as gay to my family over 30 years ago, I was in tears and I was ashamed, and they were ashamed. But sharing this book with the public, which I did in degrees, I shared it with first readers. Some of those wonderful people are here tonight and watching on the live stream. That was one step towards sharing it. Getting a literary agent, and that was another step towards trying to find a voice, a place in the world for it. And then when I signed a publishing deal, of course there was no turning back then, because you can't get out of those. And so that was really my path to sharing it, and it has turned out to be sort of a coming out as a whole person. And I'm not crying, and I'm not ashamed, and I think I am more courageous because of it.
Now, have how's your family reacted to this book? I mean, that's the...
Well, in the dedication, let's start there. I write to my beloved partner, to my cherished, perfectly imperfect family, and to fellow fringies everywhere. And I wrote that because my family and I have been through some really rough times, as I'm not alone in that. It's a universal theme, isn't it? But in that process, I have come to really cherish them and appreciate them, and they will read it in that context. They're just now reading it because it's just now available to the public. But they will read it in that context. However, I will say that there have been some comments so far, and they fall into one of three categories. And the first one is from my father. You wrote a what? A novel? Is it going to be a hardback? So that was important, being a hardback. The second one was...
None of them direct paperback things.
Not this time. Nothing wrong with that.
Nothing's anything wrong.
And the other comments I've gotten have been some version of, we didn't know you had such a rough time of it. We didn't know, and we didn't understand. And then there have been the occasional, can we get some free copies to give as birthday and Christmas presents? So that's been the reaction from family.
Yeah. So I understand that you're donating part of the proceeds of this book to two organizations for at-risk youth. Would you mind telling us a bit about that?
Yes, I would love to. I've long been a fan of the really important work of two organizations, their work day to day. The Born This Way Foundation, which is Lady Gaga and her mother's foundation, which is really dedicated to helping at-risk youth find their way to having more meaningful lives. And the other is the Trevor Project, which spends its resources really saving lives of LGBTQ youth. And so I decided that I wanted some of the proceeds from the sale of Red Clay Suzie to go to support that work.
Okay. Well, before we go to questions, I would like to ask you for the young people who are watching or listening today, who are struggling for whatever reason with their life as outsiders, what closing words do you have for them?
I would like them to know that bullies are paper predators who have no more power over them than they themselves give them, and that they're as afraid of life as you are. And once you understand that, they lose their sovereignty. And I would want them to know that their bodies, with their imperfections, whether real or perceived, their bodies are precious and sacred, and please treat them with as much care and love as you can so that they'll take you as far as they can. And I'd want them to know that their hearts and minds are the most important things about them, and I think most of all, I'd want them to know that love is never wrong. True love is never wrong. And they should bravely bestow it on whomever is worthy of that gift. That's what I wish I had known growing up. That's what if I were able, I would go back and whisper that into the ear of my younger self.
Great. Now, is this Georgia Red Clay?
Oh, thank you for asking.
Before I just noticed that sitting there.
This is red clay from my parents' yard. And it is, no matter where I go in the world, no matter what I do, I'm a Southerner and a Southern writer. And part of it is because of this, because once it touches you, it never leaves you, and you can never leave it. So you're welcome to look at it and shake it if you want.
So questions, and if you have a question, if you would please come to the mic, and that will get questions on camera. So questions from the audience. Yes. Could you please?
I need to come around.
Yes, please.
Here?
Yes.
Hi.
Yes, I'm also somewhat of a car guy. The problem with being a car guy is often when you're young and really into it, you don't really have the money to get the car of your dreams. So I have
still
two questions for you now. What are you driving now? And if the book is wildly successful beyond your dreams, what will you be buying then?
All right, there you go.
Oh my gosh. Well, I do love cars, and I typically drive them for about 15 years. So I'm more practical, I think, than in the practicality side wins out over the love of cars. But I've had a variety of cars. I'll tell you about a few of them just very briefly. So I've had 3 Subarus, and that's currently what I drive. But I've also had my very first car was a 1982 Pontiac J2000, and it was underpowered and over-designed and just a terror. Now, GM, do not come after me. That car has not been in production for years. But that was my very first car, and then I had, a series of Subarus. Right now, I have a Subaru Forester, and it is green. And if you read the book, you'll understand that green is very important to me. So thank you for asking.
And what the second part was,
yes, I'm sorry.
If you are wildly successful beyond all your
Oh.
dreams, what would you then buy?
My car's in pretty good shape. I don't think I'd buy another one. I think I'd try to find some way to. Oh, is that the wrong answer? I would buy.
Bentley.
Well, I don't know about that, but I would buy Eric a Bentley. Thank you for the help. I appreciate that. need some prompts here.
Would the Bentley be electric? No.
Of course.
Jeff, I'm just curious. I appreciate you bringing up that jar and linking it to Georgia and the South. But my question for you, since I'm from North Carolina, is what motivated you to leave the South and settle outside the South?
Well, I left because I actually had a summer job in DC, and I went to LaGrange College and I studied and got the very, very useful, more useful than I imagined, trifecta of speech, communications, and theater. And I wanted to be a professional actor, which I did that for a number of years. And so my summer job was to be in the Maryland Renaissance Festival, just outside of DC. So I moved up here, met some lovely people, was introduced to DC and fell in love. And I went back, got my J2000 and made it up here, and I never went back.
So you didn't have any desire to go back to and settle up in a place like Atlanta?
Atlanta's a great city as well, but change is not easy for a lot of people, and that includes me. Yeah. And I was young, and it was an exciting place to be here. And there was, after a while, it felt like home, and it feels like home. Yeah. So,
good for you.
But I do visit. I do visit back there.
No, we're glad you're living here in DC and having us pay taxes. Thank
you. You know, Jeff, Southerners go home one way or the other. Sometimes it's in a box.
To the red clay.
Back to the red clay. Yes.
Hi. So I have a question for you. And thank you for that lovely reading and beautiful discussion. Thank you. That was very thought-provoking.
Thank you.
So being a novice writer of sorts, and the question really is from that view. So when you started to write and you were just writing in the, in the train and wherever, at what point did you start thinking that this was going to go outside? In a sense, when you put those words on paper, initially they're yours, but then they become public. So did you ever think in terms of a particular audience? I mean, did you ever think that maybe I should write in this way because this is who I want to be reading my book? Or, that's sort of the question I have, that at what time do you start thinking in terms of other people looking at what you're doing?
Oh, thank you for asking me that. It was, as I think the word I used with healing catharsis, it really was a healing experience. And, and it was in isolation. I didn't tell anybody I was doing it. And sort of going from the train with lots of people around to my car for a very short drive home. And I was alone, sealed into the car. And cars, of course, are very important to me. And I felt at home in the car. It was comfortable. It was a place that I could safely just sort of sob openly. And it was during that experience, those series of days, that I would go from work to the train to my car before I got home. And I thought, this is painful, but it is ultimately going to make me a happier person, a healthier person. And at some point, the idea just came to me that it may just help a younger person who is experiencing now what I experienced back then. I don't want them to get to my age and have to go through this experience. And then that is how I came up with the idea to share it, hoping it would help other people.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hello.
I was so glad to hear that it's going to be an audiobook, because I heard your voice when I was reading it, and I'd love to hear how someone else renders it. But that makes me wonder, what else is going to happen for these characters? Do you envision anything further for them?
Oh, my dear friend Monica Mohindra, folks, also from the Library of Congress. This is, I think this is just the beginning of Filbert's story, of Filbert and Knox's story. I believe this sets the foundation for a few more red clay novels. And I hope that by reading Red Clay Suzie, that you will come to know and love them and want to hear more of their story. So there is more.
That's the answer I wanted.
Thank you.
She gets a Bentley too.
You get a Bentley. You get a Bentley.
Oh, if
Gotta
it does
sell
really
a lot of
well,
these.
then do I get a Bentley?
You would be first in line, but you're second in line after Eric.
No, I'll let Eric go.
Okay. Oh, thank you.
Other questions from the audience? No further questions?
Well, thank you so much, everyone,
Yes.
for
Thank you.
being here.
Thank you for writing this, Jeff, and thank you for your honesty and openness in sharing this story with the world.
Well,
So
thank you. And I want to also say how much I appreciate your being a partner in this journey, because Ralph has been quite a mentor, I would say, a guide, champion, and all the way from the very beginning to tonight. And for such an esteemed author I've respected for so many years, I'm so grateful for that. And I want to thank all of you for coming and sharing this evening with me. So many friends and family, and I'm not going to try to pinpoint or name everybody because I'll miss somebody, and that wouldn't be fair. But I do want to say hello and thank, in the live stream, Mona Kanan, who is my wonderful agent literary agent at Great Dog Literary, and also Deborah Englander, my acquisitions editor at the publisher. It's been a community, and I feel my life is so much richer, and I feel more connected to people through this process, and I'm just so grateful, and I hope that this helps. I hope it helps. Thank you.
Yes.
And thanks to Politics and Prose for having me.
Thank